What if the history we've been taught is incomplete? What if there are structures, artifacts, and mysteries scattered across the globe that simply don't fit the timeline? Tonight, we're traveling to places that challenge everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. Places where the evidence doesn't match the story. And some people would prefer they stayed buried. The story begins in a place most archaeologists never expected to look. High in the Shanxi province of China, about 200 miles north of Xi'an, there's a landscape that doesn't make sense. Stone fortifications stretch across nearly 1,000 acres of remote highland terrain. For decades, locals thought these were just remnants of the Great Wall. They weren't. In 2011, Chinese archaeologists confirmed what they'd been quietly investigating for years. This wasn't part of any wall, it was a city, a massive, fortified settlement that predates the first Chinese dynasty by more than 1,000 years. They call it Shimao, and it rewrites the book on early Chinese civilization. The site covers almost 1,000 acres. To put that in perspective, that's larger than the oldest sections of many medieval European cities. But Shimao was already ancient when those cities were built. Carbon dating places the main construction phase around 2300 BC. That's late Neolithic, no bronze tools, no written language as we understand it. And yet, whoever built this understood engineering on a scale that shouldn't have been possible. At the center of the complex sits an 11-step pyramid, stone walls rising in terraces, some sections 30 feet thick. These aren't crude stone piles. The blocks are precisely cut and fitted, and embedded throughout the walls, jade. Hundreds of pieces of carved jade incorporated directly into the masonry. Not as decoration, as part of the structure itself. Now, jade is incredibly hard to work with. It requires patience, skill, and tools that can handle a material tougher than most rocks. The ancient Chinese revered jade more than gold. It represented heaven, immortality, purity. So why would anyone use it to build walls? It's like constructing a fortress out of diamonds. But the real mystery started when they began excavating the gates. The main entrance to the inner city was a massive structure, probably once topped with wooden buildings that have long since rotted away. At the base of this gate, buried in the foundation layer, they found human remains. Lots of them. 70 human skulls to be exact. Forensic analysis showed they belonged primarily to young women, teenagers and women in their early 20s. And the skulls showed clear signs of violent trauma. These people had been killed, decapitated, and their heads placed deliberately in pits beneath the gate during construction. The question isn't just who these people were, it's why. Human sacrifice wasn't uncommon in ancient cultures, but usually it was reserved for temples or burial sites. This was different. These remains were part of the foundation, as if the builders believed that sealing human remains into the structure would strengthen it, or protect it, or perhaps appease something. And then there's the bigger question, who were these people? Traditional Chinese history places the rise of complex civilization around 1600 BC with the Shang dynasty. That's when we see the first clear evidence of cities, writing, bronze metallurgy. Shimao predates all of that by 700 years. The site was clearly occupied by a sophisticated society. They had organized labor, advanced stonemasonry, long-distance trade networks. That jade came from hundreds of miles away. They had art, religious practices, and a social hierarchy complex enough to mobilize thousands of workers. And then, around 1800 BC, they simply abandoned it. The walls were left standing. The jade remained in place. Everyone just left. No written records explain why. No legends survived in Chinese oral tradition. For more than 3,000 years, Shimao sat empty while dynasties rose and fell. Wars swept across China, and new cities were built elsewhere. The knowledge of who built it and why simply vanished. Modern archaeologists are still piecing together the story. Each excavation season brings new discoveries. More jade, more bones, evidence of water management systems and grain storage. But the fundamental questions remain. How did a pre-Bronze Age society create something this massive and sophisticated? What threat were they protecting against with walls 30 feet thick? And what happened that made them walk away from everything they'd built? The silence at Shimao is absolute. No answers are forthcoming. Just stone and jade and the bones of the forgotten. 7,000 miles to the west, in the mountains of eastern India, there's another place that defies explanation. Not a city this time. Something stranger. The Baalbek Caves sit in the Jahanabad district of Bihar, about 15 miles north of the city of Gaya. There are 7 chambers carved directly into solid granite hillsides, and if you've seen Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, you've seen them. They were the filming location. But the real mystery here is far stranger than anything Hollywood invented. These caves were carved sometime around 250 BC, during the Mauryan Empire. We know this because several of them contain inscriptions from Emperor Ashoka, who ruled India in the 3rd century BC. The inscriptions dedicate the caves to an ascetic religious sect called the Ajivakas. That part is documented. What isn't documented is how the caves were made. The walls inside these chambers are polished to a mirror finish. Not approximately smooth, not relatively polished. We're talking about granite surfaces finished to a degree that rivals modern machining. Run your hand across these walls and you'll feel no tool marks, no irregularities. The surface reflects light. It echoes sound in ways that make the acoustics inside these chambers unlike anything else on Earth. Stand in the Lomas Rishi cave and whisper. The sound will bounce back at you, amplified, resonant. Clap your hands and the echo sustains for several seconds longer than it should in a space this size. The granite has been shaped and polished in a way that turns the entire chamber into an acoustic instrument. Now here's where it gets interesting. Granite is one of the hardest stones on Earth. Carving it requires either bronze or iron tools, and even then, it's incredibly slow, difficult work. But creating a mirror polish on granite? That's a whole different problem. Modern stoneworkers use diamond-tipped tools and power equipment. They use measured grades of abrasives, working from coarse to increasingly fine grits. The process takes time, precision, and technology. The Baalbek caves were carved around 250 BC. Bronze Age technology, iron was relatively new. There's no evidence of diamond tools or powered machinery. And yet these chambers exist. Not just rough caverns, but precisely carved spaces with architectural details, arched doorways, curved ceilings, pillared entrances, all polished to a glass-like finish. The conventional explanation is patient hand polishing using abrasive powders, sand, water, time. Maybe decades of work for each chamber. But if you ask modern stone carvers if they could replicate this finish, using only ancient tools. Most will tell you the same thing. They don't know how it was done. There are no tool marks visible anywhere. The curves are mathematically precise. The polish is uniform across thousands of square feet of surface area. This level of precision suggests either a technique we've lost or an understanding of stoneworking that was far more advanced than we've given ancient craftsmen credit for. And then there's the question of why. These caves were supposedly created as meditation chambers for the Ajivikas, a now extinct religious sect that practiced extreme asceticism. Fair enough. But why go to such extraordinary lengths? Why polish the granite to this degree? Was it purely aesthetic? Or did the builders understand something about acoustics and resonance that we're only beginning to rediscover? Recent acoustic studies have shown that certain frequencies resonate inside these chambers in unusual ways. Low-frequency sounds particularly, the kind of deep, rhythmic chanting used in meditation. It's almost as if the caves were designed as amplification chambers for specific types of sound, engineered spaces for altered states of consciousness. But that's speculation. What we know for certain is that someone, 2,300 years ago, carved these chambers with a level of precision that remains difficult to explain. The inscriptions tell us when they were made and who dedicated them. But the inscriptions don't tell us how. That knowledge, like so much else, was never written down. The Ajivikas are gone. Their teachings, their practices, their specific understanding of these caves, all lost to time. What remains is the stone itself, perfect, polished, silent. Halfway around the world in the remote highlands of Indonesia, there's another mystery. This one involves death, cliffs, and coffins that shouldn't be there. The island of Sulawesi sits in the heart of Indonesia, between Borneo and the Maluku Islands. It's one of the largest islands in the world, mostly covered in rainforest and dominated by rugged, mountainous terrain. And high on the faces of limestone cliffs, sometimes 200 feet above the valley floor, there are coffins. They're called liang, meaning cave or crevice in the local Torajan language. But these aren't natural resting places. Someone carried these coffins up vertical rock faces and secured them in cracks and small caves, far beyond where any normal person could reach. And they've been doing it for more than 400 years. The Torajan people are the indigenous inhabitants of the central highlands of Sulawesi. Their culture has always revolved around elaborate death rituals. When someone dies, the body isn't buried immediately. Instead, it's preserved, traditionally with plant-based embalming techniques, and kept in the family home, sometimes for months or even years, while preparations are made for the funeral. The actual funeral is a massive undertaking. Buffaloes are sacrificed, sometimes dozens of them. The more important the person, the more elaborate the ceremony. It can cost a family their entire savings. And only after all of this can the body finally be laid to rest. But here's where it gets unusual. The Torajans traditionally didn't bury their dead in the ground. They believed the soul needed to ascend, to reach Puya, the land of spirits. So they placed the bodies high as they could reach. The oldest cliff coffins date back to the 17th century, though the practice is likely much older. Getting a coffin up a 200-foot vertical cliff face isn't easy. Historical accounts describe teams of men using bamboo scaffolding and rope ladders. It could take days, sometimes weeks. And it was dangerous. People died doing this. But that wasn't enough for the most revered members of society. For them, the Trojans would go a step further. They'd carve life-sized wooden effigies called tau, detailed sculptures representing the deceased dressed in clothes, positioned on balconies carved into the cliff face. These figures would stand watch over the valley forever, or at least until the wood rotted and the sculptures tumbled down the cliff face. Now you might wonder why anyone would maintain such a difficult, dangerous tradition. The Trojans believed that elevation was crucial. The higher the body, the easier the soul's journey to the afterlife. But there may have been practical reasons too. The highlands of Sulawesi are hot and humid. Bodies decay quickly. Placing remains in cliff face cavities kept them dry, ventilated, and inaccessible to scavengers. But over the centuries, something has been happening to these burial sites. The coffins are deteriorating. Wooden beams that once held them in place have weakened. Some have fallen, spilling their contents down the cliff face. Others have been looted, grave robbers risking their lives to steal whatever valuables might have been buried with the dead. And then there's a question that modern anthropologists struggle with. How widespread was this practice? The Trojan people didn't just live in one village. They occupied a fairly large region of the highlands. Yet cliff burials are concentrated in specific valleys. Why? Were certain cliffs considered sacred? Were only certain families allowed to use them? Or was this practice reserved for particular social classes? Written records from Sulawesi are scarce until the Dutch colonial period in the 19th century, and by then, many of the traditions were already changing. Christian missionaries arrived, and conversion gradually shifted burial practices. Today, most Trojans are Christian, though elements of the old traditions persist. Some families still hold elaborate funeral ceremonies. A few communities still carve tau figures. But the practice of cliff burial has mostly ended. What remains are the coffins themselves, hundreds of them, perched on cliff faces throughout the highlands. Some are maintained by descendants who still remember which ancestor rests where. Others have been abandoned, forgotten, left to the mercy of weather and time. The wooden effigies still stand watch. Their painted faces have faded. Their clothes have rotted away. But they remain these silent guardians, marking the boundary between the living world below and whatever lies beyond. From the tropical highlands of Indonesia, we travel north, far north, to the frozen edge of Siberia, where the oldest wooden sculpture in the world changes everything we thought we knew about prehistoric art. In 1890, Russian workers were digging for peat in a bog near the town of Kirovgrad, deep in the Ural Mountains of western Siberia. Peat was valuable, used for fuel and fertilizer, and the bogs in this region were deep, formed over thousands of years of accumulated plant matter. The workers dug down through layers of compressed vegetation, past the topsoil, deeper into the ancient deposits, and then their shovels hit something that shouldn't have been there. Wood. But not just any wood. Carved larch wood. Fragments of what appeared to be a large sculpture, covered in precise geometric designs. They pulled pieces from the peat, faces, limbs, fragments of a body. The workers had no idea what they'd found. The fragments eventually made their way to a museum in Yekaterinburg. There, archaeologists attempted to reassemble them. What emerged was extraordinary. A wooden figure, originally about 17 feet tall, carved from a single large log. The surface was covered in geometric patterns, zigzags, diagonal lines intersecting chevrons, and faces. 7 faces, each one different, carved into the flat surfaces of the plank-like body. For decades, scholars assumed it was old, maybe a few centuries, medieval at most. But when radiocarbon dating became available in the 20th century, they tested the wood. The results didn't make sense, so they tested it again and again. The Shigir idol is 12,500 years old, 12 and a half millennia. That's not a typo. This sculpture was carved at the end of the last ice age, when woolly mammoths still walked the earth, when humans in most of the world were hunter-gatherers living in small bands, when agriculture hadn't been invented yet, when stone tools were state-of-the-art. But here's the problem. This level of artistry shouldn't exist in that time period. The geometric designs are complex, deliberately planned. The faces are stylized but clearly representational. This isn't crude carving. This is art. This is symbolism. This is someone or some culture with an aesthetic tradition sophisticated enough to conceive of and execute something this intricate. The oldest known cave paintings, Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, they're impressive, yes, but they're in the range of 15,000 to 30,000 years old, and they're animal depictions, hunting scenes, handprints. The Shigir idol is different. It's abstract, it's symbolic, it's covered in designs that must have meant something to the people who made it, but we have no idea what. Recent analysis using advanced microscopy has shown that the idol was carved using at least 3 different types of tools. Whoever made this understood woodworking. They knew how to select appropriate larch timber. Larch is resistant to decay, which is probably why it survived in the peat bog. They knew how to season the wood, how to carve it without splitting the grain. This wasn't the work of someone experimenting with their first sculpture. This was the product of a developed tradition. But what tradition? No other artifacts from this period in Siberia come close to this level of sophistication. There are stone tools, yes, animal bones, evidence of hunting camps, but nothing that suggests the kind of cultural complexity required to produce the Shigir idol. It's like finding a Picasso in a Stone Age cave. We don't know what it represented. We don't know where it was originally displayed. The peat bog where it was found may not have been its original location. It could have fallen in or been deliberately placed there. We don't know if it stood alone or was part of a larger site. We don't know if the faces represent gods, ancestors, spirits, or something else entirely. And here's what really keeps archaeologists up at night. If a culture in Siberia was capable of creating something this sophisticated 12,500 years ago, what else were they creating? Wood doesn't survive well outside of unique preservation environments like peat bogs. How many other sculptures, tools, structures made of wood have simply rotted away over the millennia, leaving no trace? The conventional narrative of human prehistory has been one of slow, gradual progress. Simple stone tools give way to more complex ones. Cave paintings evolve into more sophisticated art. Eventually, settlements form, agriculture develops, civilization emerges. But the Shigir idol doesn't fit that narrative. It suggests that complexity existed much earlier than we thought, that cultures we've dismissed as primitive hunter-gatherers may have had rich artistic traditions, complex belief systems, and technical skills that we vastly underestimated. The idol now sits in a climate-controlled case in the Sverdlovsk Regional Museum in Yekaterinburg. It's deteriorating despite preservation efforts. Wood this old doesn't last forever, even under ideal conditions. Researchers are racing to document every detail before it's too late. High-resolution 3D scans, chemical analysis, every possible method to extract information before time claims what the peat bog protected for so long. But the biggest questions remain unanswered. Who carved this? What did it mean? And what else did they create that we'll never find? From the frozen north, we travel to the warm, shallow waters of the Caribbean, to a place where natural geology and human construction have been locked in debate for over 50 years. About half a mile off the coast of North Bimini Island in the Bahamas, there's something lying in the ocean floor, a formation of rectangular and semi-rectangular stones arranged in a remarkably straight line stretching for roughly half a mile. From the air, it looks like a road, or a wall, or the foundation of something that was once much larger. It was discovered in 1968 by a pilot named Robert Brush, who spotted it while flying over the shallow waters near Bimini. He mentioned it to a few people, including a local archaeologist and a team of divers. When they investigated, they found what appeared to be massive limestone blocks, some weighing several tons, arranged in a linear pattern. The blocks were relatively flat with straight edges, sitting in water about 15 to 20 feet deep. Almost immediately, people started speculating. Was this a road? A harbor? Part of a larger structure now submerged? And more provocatively, could this be evidence of Atlantis? That last question comes from a weird coincidence. In 1938, a psychic named Edgar Cayce, famous in certain circles for his supposed abilities, made a prediction. He claimed that evidence of Atlantis would be discovered near Bimini in 1968 or 1969. When Brush spotted the formation in 1968, the timing seemed almost too perfect. The media ran with it. Headlines declared Atlantis found. Television specials were produced, and serious archaeologists found themselves having to wade into a debate that mixed geology, archaeology, and outright pseudoscience. So what is it really? The skeptical explanation is straightforward. These are naturally occurring beach rock formations. Beach rock forms when calcium carbonate precipitates from seawater and cements sand and shell fragments together. Under the right conditions, it can create flat, rectangular shapes that look manufactured. Geological surveys of the area have shown that similar formations exist elsewhere around Bimini and throughout the Caribbean. The fracture patterns in the stones are consistent with natural processes. There's no evidence of tool marks, no mortar, no artifacts nearby that would suggest human activity. And the stones themselves haven't been quarried. They're sitting on bedrock of the same material. Case closed, right? Natural formation, not particularly mysterious, except the arrangement is remarkably straight. Natural beach rock doesn't usually form in perfectly linear patterns stretching for half a mile. And some of the blocks do appear to be stacked, one on top of another, which is unusual for a natural formation. A few researchers have argued that while the stones themselves may be natural beach rock, they could have been arranged by humans. Ancient people could have taken existing flat stones and placed them deliberately to create a breakwater, a harbor wall, or a foundation for structures built above the waterline. If sea levels were lower thousands of years ago, which they were, this area would have been dry land or very shallow water. During the last ice age, sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than today. As the ice melted, coastal areas around the world flooded. If there were ancient settlements along the Bimini coast, they'd now be underwater. And if those settlements used available stone for construction, the remains might look exactly like what we see here. But here's the problem with that theory. There's no other evidence, no pottery fragments, no tools, no post holes, no charcoal from fires, no shell middens, the garbage heaps that ancient coastal people always left behind, just the stones. And stones alone can't tell us if they were arranged by humans or shaped by waves. More recent investigations have used ground-penetrating radar and sonar to map the area around the formation. Some scans suggest there may be more structures buried beneath the sand. Others show nothing unusual. The problem is interpretation. When you're looking at grainy sonar images of rocks under sand, it's easy to see what you want to see. So where does that leave us? The scientific consensus leans toward natural formation, beach rock, a geological curiosity, nothing more. But a small number of researchers remain unconvinced. They point to the linear arrangement. They point to the size and weight of some blocks. They point to the possibility that ancient people in the Caribbean were more sophisticated than we've given them credit for. The truth is, we don't know. We don't know if humans had anything to do with this formation. We don't know who they would have been or when they would have been here. We don't know what purpose it would have served. And unless someone finds definitive evidence, a tool, an artifact, something that clearly indicates human activity, we probably never will. The stones remain where they've been for thousands of years, silent, ambiguous, neither confirming nor denying the questions we keep asking. Back across the Atlantic in the heart of Germany, there's another stone formation, this one decidedly on land. And the locals have been arguing about it for centuries. In the Harz Mountains of northern Germany, just south of the town of Blankenberg, there's a ridge of sandstone that cuts through the landscape like a broken spine. The Germans call it the Teufelsmauer, the Devil's Wall. It stretches for about 12 miles, a jagged line of weathered rock formations that rise abruptly from the surrounding terrain, sometimes reaching heights of 60 feet or more. The local legend is straightforward. God and the devil made a wager about who would control the land. They agreed to divide it, and in one night the devil built a wall to mark his territory. When morning came, the devil's rooster crowed too early, or God made it crow early, depending on which version you believe, and the devil, thinking dawn had arrived, flew into a rage and smashed his own wall. What remains are these scattered fragments of stone. Charming story, but the geological explanation is more interesting. The Teufelsmauer is what's left of a massive sandstone formation deposited during the Cretaceous period, roughly 85 million years ago. Over time, erosion wore away the softer rock, leaving only the harder sandstone ridges. What we see today is the resistant edge of a geological layer that once covered a much larger area. So, natural formation. Mystery solved. Except the mystery isn't about whether the devil actually built it. The mystery is why this particular ridge has been considered significant for so long. Archaeological evidence shows that this area was important to prehistoric people. There are Bronze Age burial mounds nearby, stone circles, traces of ancient settlements. The ridge itself seems to have served as a territorial boundary for various cultures over thousands of years. Germanic tribes used it as a marker. Medieval kingdoms drew borders along it. Even today, it roughly follows administrative boundaries. And there are markings. Not many, and nothing clearly decipherable, but enough to suggest that people were carving symbols into these stones long before recorded history. The problem is, weathering has erased most of the details. What remains could be ancient writing, religious symbols, territorial markers, or just idle scratching. No one can say for certain. The name itself, Devil's Wall, appears in written records going back to at least the 13th century, but oral tradition probably goes back much further. When Christianity spread through this region, many pagan sacred sites were rebranded as places associated with the devil. It was an effective way to discourage worship at old holy sites. If your ancestors revered a particular rock formation, calling it the Devil's Wall made it taboo. So the question becomes, what made this ridge sacred in the first place? Was it simply the unusual appearance? The way it rises dramatically from flat land would certainly make it a natural landmark. Or was there something else? Did the ridge have acoustic properties, astronomical alignments, or some other characteristic that ancient people found significant? Modern surveys haven't found any obvious astronomical alignments, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. Ancient cultures often oriented monuments towards sunrise or sunset on specific days, solstices, equinoxes, important dates in agricultural or religious calendars. With a 12-mile-long ridge, there are countless potential sightlines. Finding a meaningful alignment would require knowing what you're looking for. Today, the Teufelsmauer is a nature preserve and a popular hiking destination. Tourists climb the formations for views of the countryside. Rock climbers test their skills on the sandstone faces. School groups learn about geology, but walk along the ridge at dawn or dusk, when the light slants low and the wind moves through the gaps in the stone. And it's not hard to imagine why ancient people thought this place was special. There's something about natural formations that look almost deliberate. Our brains are wired to see patterns, faces, purpose. Sometimes that leads us to see things that aren't there. But sometimes, it points us towards something our ancestors understood that we've forgotten. The challenge is knowing which is which. The Teufelsmauer keeps its secrets. Whatever it meant to the people who named it, whatever ceremonies or rituals might have happened here, the stones aren't telling. From Germany's forests, we climb, high into the Andes Mountains of Peru, to a place where stone and sky meet at an altitude that makes breathing difficult and questions impossible to ignore. About 22 miles from the city of Puno, in the Peruvian highlands near Lake Titicaca, there's a door carved into a cliff, or at least it looks like a door. A squared-off recess cut into the rock face, about 23 feet tall and 20 feet wide. In the center of that recess, at ground level, there's a smaller alcove, roughly 6 feet tall, just the right size for a person to stand in. The locals call it Aramu Muru, though it's also known as the Gate of the Gods or the Gate of the Moon. The site sits at an elevation of nearly 13,000 feet. The air is thin, The landscape is stark: high desert plateau, rocky outcrops, sparse vegetation. Not exactly a place where you'd expect to find monumental architecture. And yet, here's this carving: precise right angles, smooth surfaces, a rectangular portal to nowhere. Local legend says the doorway is a portal to the land of the gods, that ancient priests could use it to travel to another realm, or to summon deities, or to access hidden knowledge. Some versions of the story involve an Incan priest named Aramumuru, who fled from Cusco with a sacred golden disc during the Spanish conquest. He supposedly used the disc as a key to open the doorway and escape into another dimension. The door sealed behind him. He was never seen again. That's folklore, obviously, but folklore usually has roots in something real. So what is this thing? Who carved it, and why? The geological formation is red sandstone, common in this region. Sandstone is relatively soft, which makes it easier to carve than granite or basalt. But this wasn't just rough hacking with stone tools. The edges are straight. The surface is relatively smooth. Whoever did this had a plan and the skill to execute it. The problem is attribution. The site isn't well documented in academic literature. There are no inscriptions, no artifacts found in the immediate vicinity that would help date it. The style doesn't match typical Incan stonework. The Incas were famous for their precisely fitted polygonal masonry. This is different. It's geometric, simple, but deliberately simple, not crude. Some researchers have suggested it could be pre-Incan. The Tiwanaku culture flourished in this region from around 300 AD to 1000 AD, before the Inca Empire rose to dominance. Tiwanaku architecture often featured large stone portals and doorways. The famous Gate of the Sun at Tiwanaku is covered in intricate carvings, but the basic structure, a squared-off opening in stone, is similar. But if this was carved by the Tiwanaku, why is it isolated? Most of their structures are part of larger complexes, temples, plazas, ceremonial centers. This sits alone on a cliff face, miles from anywhere. Was it a shrine, a marker, the entrance to something that no longer exists? There's another possibility. It might be unfinished. The outer recess could have been the first stage of a larger carving project that was abandoned. The inner alcove might have been a test cut or a foundation point for something more elaborate. Without additional evidence, it's hard to say. What's interesting is the site's modern reputation. Over the last few decades, it's become a pilgrimage destination for people interested in alternative archaeology and New Age spirituality. Visitors report feeling unusual energy at the site. Some claim to have visions or altered states of consciousness. Hands pressed against the stone supposedly produce tingling sensations or feelings of warmth. Now, whether those experiences are genuine or psychological or purely imaginary doesn't really matter in terms of the archaeological question. What matters is that something about this site, its isolation, its proportions, its simplicity, creates a powerful psychological effect. People feel something here, and maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what it was designed to do. Ancient sacred sites often share certain characteristics. They're placed in dramatic locations. They use geometry in specific ways. They create spaces that feel different from ordinary spaces. Whether that's due to acoustic properties, visual perspective, isolation, or something else, the effect is real. And ancient architects understood how to create it. So maybe this isn't a door to another dimension. Maybe it's a door to another state of mind, a threshold between the mundane and the sacred, a place where the act of standing, of being present, of contemplating the vastness of the landscape and the sky, fundamentally changes your perspective. The stone offers no answers, just the question carved into its face, a doorway, leading nowhere, or everywhere, depending on how you look at it. 7 places, 7 mysteries. Some are probably natural formations that look artificial. Some are genuine human constructions that we don't fully understand. Some exist in that uncomfortable middle ground where evidence points in multiple directions and certainty is impossible. What connects them isn't that they're all unexplained. What connects them is that they force us to question our assumptions about ancient people, about what was possible with pre-industrial technology, about how much knowledge has been lost over the millennia. Each of these places tells us something, not always what we want to hear, not always a clear story, but something. They tell us that the past is deeper than we think, that human ingenuity has always been remarkable, that nature creates wonders we struggle to distinguish from human work, and that the boundary between what we know and what we imagine is thinner than we'd like to admit. The textbooks give us a simplified narrative. Civilization progresses in a straight line, from simple to complex, from stone tools to bronze to iron to steel, from hunter-gatherers to farmers to city builders. And that narrative is mostly true, but it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is messier. Cultures rose and fell. Knowledge was gained and lost. People accomplished things we can barely replicate today, then vanished, leaving only stones and questions. Other people saw patterns in nature and wove stories around them that survived longer than the civilizations that told them. Modern archaeology is slowly filling in the gaps. New dating techniques, better analysis, DNA studies revealing migration patterns we never suspected. Each year brings new discoveries, new revisions to what we thought we knew. But the work is slow, and for every question answered, 2 more appear. That's not a problem. That's the point. Mystery is what drives us to keep looking, to keep questioning, to approach the past with humility and curiosity rather than certainty. The moment we think we have all the answers is the moment we stop learning.